From the Warhammer Imperium magazine, collected short stories narrated by J.H. Miniatures. At the request of Inquisitor Draxos, Crimson Doom. From the personal log of General Ardian Kale, Valanthan 1st Armoured Division, deceased. They came without warning, appearing behind the walls of our fortresses in their hundreds. First they struck our energy generators, then our automated defences. Then, having blunted our defences, the true assault began. Never have I seen such firepower. The 2nd Armoured Division was annihilated in mere seconds. We have been ordered to counterattack and buy time for reinforcements to arrive. A futile gesture, I feel, but I shall do my duty to the end. The Emperor protects! The legions of the Novok dynasty have emerged from a hidden dolmen gate and descended upon the imperial world of Valantha. Crusade Fleet Primus has responded to the world's cries for help, dispatching an entire cohort of Adeptus Mechanicus warriors to confront the invading foes. Zexos 155.51, Skitarii Ranger Alpha of the 4th Maniple, 2nd Cohort of Mars's 10th Macroclade, reloaded his radium pistol and gestured forwards, sending his robed warriors into the thick of the fighting. The chants of his tech priest superiors filled his audio receptors, their calming tones filling his warriors with religious fervour. The lumbering Xenos phalanxes closed in around his rangers, firing their Gauss weapons and awkwardly clubbing at any Skitarii warriors who moved within range. The Imperial forces were overwhelmed. The smoking remains of an entire Astra Militarum armoured regiment lay scattered across the battlefield. The smoking hulls of Lehman Russ tanks and Chimera armoured transports crackling and popping as their ammunition and fuel burned. At Zexos 155.51's side, Ranger Mu 154.41 pivoted his transuranic arquebus on its bipod mount, firing precise shots into the Necron's advance. Each round found its mark with a crack, hurling the metallic foes to the dirt. Some faded from existence, their repair routines overwhelmed by the explosive power of the weapon's ammunition. Others rose steadily to their feet, their alien forms knitting back together as swiftly as they had been blasted apart. Casualty readouts filled Zexo's visual displays, flashing binaric text warning him that Gyro 14's life signs read negative. He turned to see the form of the fallen warrior face down in the dirt, a ragged hole in his chest, organs both metallic and living reduced to atoms by Necron Gauss fire. Still, the Skitarii maniples were faring rather better than their Astra Militarum allies. The bodies of human soldiers were strewn into the distance, torn apart by their crimson-armoured Necron assailants, who seemed to delight in bathing themselves in the blood of their victims. Mu 154's arquebus cracked once more, firing another explosive round into the Necrons, blasting a smoking hole into the skull of a Necron warrior. The Xenos android slumped backwards, form already fading from existence. Zexos activated his Vox unit and transmitted a sharp burst of binaric, the machine language by which the Skitarii communicated. He ordered his warriors to fall back and form a line once more. As his squad retreated, a band of electro-priests surged into the position they had vacated, their bodies wreathed with blue lightning. Arcing bolts of electricity forked out from their outstretched hands, striking the alien invaders and scorching their metallic forms. The electro-priests chanted feverishly as they rushed further into the fray, singing their praise to the almighty Omnissiah. Zexos's rangers gave them what covering fire they could, but their galvanic rifles made little impact, skipping off their skeletal android forms. The electro-priests soon disappeared from sight, engulfed by the relentless advance of the Necron phalanxes. Other, larger Necrons had now joined the assault, pressing through their warrior kin to bring their own weapons to bear. Their broad shoulders were encased in the crimson plate, and they bore the glyphs of their dynasty prominently upon their armour. Zexos's enhanced brain poured through accumulated battle reports, identifying the enemies as Necron Immortals. The hulking Necrons raised their glowing green weapons. They opened fire before he could transmit a warning to his squad. Their weapons emitted forked beams of emerald lightning that leapt towards the Skitarii. Mu 154 was one of those engulfed by the coruscating energy. He let out a static cry, then toppled to the floor. arquebus and stand fell from his lifeless hands, clattering to the floor. The Immortals followed up their assault by wading into the fray. They were far faster than the Necron warriors, swinging the bladed barrels of their guns into their stunned victims. As the Necron elite advanced, however, Zexos's eyes came to rest upon the target he sought. Behind the wall of living metal, a larger figure loomed. This android sported an elaborate golden crest, a flowing robe crafted from links of shimmering living metal, and clutched in its hand a scythe taller than any mortal human. It fixed Zexos with an eerie, intense glare from its soulless mechanical eyes, and gestured towards him. The Ranger Alpha gazed around at his remaining warriors. The Necrons had them surrounded. If the Overlord was to be destroyed, he had to mark the enemy commander's position and call in support from his tech priest superiors before the maniple was completely destroyed. He activated his communications device and sent an order to Uthax-12, bearer of the squad's enhanced data tether. No response. He scanned the front line, eyes coming to rest upon the butchered body of Uthax-12. No fewer than 10 of the hulking immortals stood between him and the precious communications device. The Overlord gazed at Zexos, then towards the data tether. Despite its impassive expression, the Ranger Alpha saw a hint of understanding in its glowing alien eyes. Zexos let out another burst of binaric, ordering his troops to concentrate their fire on the Immortals, and darted towards the Uthax-12's broken form. Ahead, the Crimson Overlord twirled his war scythe and stalked determinedly towards the data tether. Galvanic rifles cracked, 2 Immortals fell. Zexos leapt through the gap in the immortal phalanx, dodging their wild strikes, and rolled forwards towards the data tether, reaching the device just as the towering Overlord's scythe descended. He dragged the data tether away from the Necron's blow, activated the device Vox unit, and transmitted his report. His duty done, he felt a wave of joy. The Necron commander would feel the wrath of Mars. Rolling onto his back, he looked up to see the Overlord's scythe glinting in the sky above him. The blade fell, and Ranger Alpha Zexos 155.51 prepared to meet his machine god. Tech Priest Gyra Demeter's code receptors flashed to life, a stream of binaric data flowing into her mind. Ranger Alpha Zexos 155.51 of the 4th Maniple had located the Necron leader. Had she been capable of a smile, Demeter may have flashed one at that moment. In fact, she had long since replaced her mouth with an augmetic loudhailer, all the better for chanting the Omnissiah's holy psalms. She stalked forwards, planting the haft of her Omnissian axe into the soil, gazing out over the front line and down again at her wrist-mounted Auspex. Zexos 155.51's last position blinked red. She turned to her maniples of lumbering Castellan robots, bulky Onager Dune crawlers, and Cataphron destroyers, and activated their slave systems. The automatons moved forwards, heading towards the Necron positions. It was time to break the enemy once and for all. The correct rituals had been undertaken, her maniples blessed and anointed with holy fluid, and the psalms of war rang out, carried by the voices of scores of electro-priests, whose crackling auras illuminated the advancing Martian forces. As the maniples pressed forwards, Necron doom scythes screamed overhead, the deafening whine of their engines playing havoc with the Skitari's sensory systems and slowing the march. The crescent-shaped aircraft strafed the procession incessantly, white-hot death rays reducing a pair of Onager Dune-crawler walkers to flaming ruins. Return fire from tracked Cataphron destroyers holed at least one of the aerial raiders. The crimson-plated Necron vessel spiraled towards a block of Ferrocrete Hab dwellings, exploding in a ball of green flame. Their advance had been noted now. Of that there was little doubt. The full might of the blood-smeared legions of the Novak dynasty turned from their skirmishes with the remaining Skitari and scattered Astra Militarum survivors, and began to fire upon Demeter's more powerful force. With a gesture from her axe and a quick burst of binaric cant, she ordered her Castellan robots into position. The monstrous automatons moved forwards, coming to rest before the Necron horde. Gauss fire splashed off their thick armour, failing to breach the plate. Beneath their giant feet, a robed Cybernetica datasmith monitored the robot systems, ensuring the carefully programmed behemoths acted exactly as ordered.
Activate
Protector protocol, she signalled to the datasmith, who nodded eagerly, his fingers playing across a data slate. The robots froze in position, taking up a wide, solid stance, and began to unleash a furious onslaught of fire into the Necron ranks. With the robots' fire covering their advance, the rest of the Martian forces pressed forwards. Electro-priests charged into the fray first, outstretched arms discharging lightning into the Necrons. Cataphron destroyers, weapon servitors combining lobotomized human pilots with the arcane technology of the Red Planet, rumbled forwards on tracks, their heavy weapons picking out Necron vehicles and Canoptech slave constructs. Without concern for their own safety, the mindless Cataphrons rolled directly into the Necron phalanxes, smashing a path through the foe's lines, weapons still firing. Demeter focused her attention on the Necron overlord. She could see the foul Xenos creature standing over the body of his Skitarii warrior, smearing the blood of the fallen over his gaunt skeletal form. Demeter hefted her axe, drew her pistol, and scurried towards the Skitarii, leaving the machines of war to continue their destructive fire. The Necron commander was no fool. His warriors had already begun to fall back into order, forming a wall of living metal, and concentrating their fire on the Martian machines of war. More doom scythes wheeled through the air above, descending to fire their death ray weapons at the Castellan robots and Onager dune crawlers. Emanatus force fields flared above the Martian vehicles, deflecting the incoming fire harmlessly away. Demeter covered the ground towards the Skitarii, her loudhailer Vox unit emitting binaric hymns. Her augmetic charges stirred, renewed vigour coursing through their pistons, cables and remaining blood vessels, propelling them forwards. More Mechanicus forces had begun to flow onto the battlefield now, their own tech priests taking up the cry, until the voices of the entire priesthood rose as one. A cacophony of praise drowning out the bone-chilling screams of doom scythes and the hissing booms of Necron Gauss weapons. Even the Necrons, whose ancient alien technology had reduced an entire Astra Militarum armoured regiment to molten metal, found themselves outmatched by the might of the Red Planet's cohorts. Through the press of androids and augmetic humans, the gigantic frame of the Necron Overlord cut a bloody swathe, his crimson and silver plate dripping with the blood of the living, and his war scythe's dimension-shearing blade was a lightning blur, severing limbs and heads with each swing. Immortals marched at his side, adding their own fire to the Overlord's murderous swings. Demeter's augmetic vision fixed upon the Necron commander, transmitting targeting information to her maniples. A hail of searing phosphor blasts and electrical explosions struck the Necron's chestplate, burning holes in his blood-splattered form. His immortals fell, yet the Overlord still stood, his green eyes meeting Demeter's own augmetic stare. Then, in a burst of emerald light, he too was gone, beamed across the void to the safety of his tomb. As the fighting continued around her, Demeter took a deep breath. The Necron vessels soared overhead, and in the distance, obsidian monoliths hovered ominously. The battle had been won, but the war for Valantha was far from over. So there you go, the Crimson Dune. My goodness, we've been building up to that one for a while, haven't we, boys and girls? I think you do notice the double length story there, and it's a hard one because some of these names are just it's one of those things that when you're reading it, it's fine. Like, you can kind of do the Skitarii, the whole numbers thing, where you've got Zexos 1... I suppose it's Zexos 155.51 or Zexos 155.51. There's no quick and easy way of saying the full name, so you have to try and shorten it. But then Ranger Moo, you can't really say Ranger Moo because it sounds daft. So Ranger Moo 154.41. It's just, these naming conventions, man. They read great, but when you're trying to narrate them, it's just like, oh. Yeah, I can't say I'm too sad when Zexos fell because it's like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to read his name anymore. But then at the same time, the actual story itself, having that combined battle is quite good. I think where this story falls short is the actual descriptions of the combat aren't that great because you're constantly sort of being juggled with these these sort of nonsense names, but then the actual violence, as it were, it's all, and then they fired their guns and things died or things got injured and fled. Whereas when you have the hand-to-hand stories, they're a lot more visceral and they're a lot more sort of easy to imagine. Because I think that's the whole thing with these narrations, with these stories, or with Warhammer stories in general. Because I know you guys will listen to other audiobook series. Like I'm not ignorant to the idea. Like, oh, I'm the only one doing this. Of course not. I myself love some of the people out there that do the audiobooks, but I certainly find the listening to the sort of the diplomacy, the conversations, the kind of the interactions between characters, I find those more interesting, and the descriptions of the hand-to-hand combat more interesting than I do the kind of like, and then the two forces shot at each other, and things died, and weapons crackled, and there has been in this story about 3 lines of dialogue for perspective. And that gets me because the better stories so far have been the ones with actual dialogue. But we've got Heart of the, oh sorry no Into the Swarm next, so we'll enjoy that. Thank you again, boys and girls, and I'll see you in the next episode.